We try to look at every aspect of our life that's changed because of the pandemic, and one of the biggest is how we work. Those of us lucky enough to still have a job have had to adapt. We're getting the work done from our kitchens or our couches. Pajamas or the new business suit. What's that done, though, to the millions of square meters of office space around the world? Much of it is empty now, and it could stay that way for a long time. Jackson Proskow explores the future of offices.
In a building in Falls Church, Virginia, we found what may be the workplace of the future. An office retrofitted and ready for the era of COVID-19. At least that's the hope.
People have seen some of the things that we're doing and they want to incorporate it into their offices as well.
Christian Pinkston has been working to get his company prepared for its uncertain next steps, figuring out what it will take to welcome staff back into the office.
The concept of just a deeper cleaning once or twice a day isn't going to be enough. And because once you bring people back into the space, it's instantly contaminated again.
In the U.S. and Canada, there are few guidelines for how offices should operate in a pandemic. So Pinkston developed his own playbook, taking a gamble on technology, starting with this ultraviolet cleanse portal, the new front door.
They'll go through this portal kind of slowly, they'll pause, they'll do a slow turn. They're making sure that all the, the surfaces of their hands and clothes are exposed to the UV lighting. And so it's cleansing them of any microbes, viruses, bacteria they might be carrying with them, and anything they're carrying as well.
So if I step into this, I'm not seeing anything. There's a little bit of like a faint.
It's a faint light and a faint sound, but that's it.
That purple glow is UVC light, known for its germ-zapping abilities. Pinkston has also installed UVC fixtures in high-traffic areas like the kitchen, along with specialized air filters.
We know that coronavirus will spread through the air droplets, and so that's a major risk factor. And so we've installed an air sanitizing troffer in this room that's constantly recirculating the air and with a very powerful UVC light inside of it.
Then there are the invisible changes. Special sensors detect if there's virus in the air. Every surface is now covered in an antimicrobial coating of titanium dioxide.
We wanted to do something that was realistic financially, but we wanted to do as much as we could within that parameter to provide the safest possible environment.
The reality is that offices are the kind of places where COVID-19 can thrive, full of shared surfaces, close quarters, and long days of uncontrolled contact. Researchers in South Korea discovered how easily the virus can spread in that environment after a cluster of 97 employees at a call center in Seoul tested positive for COVID-19. When health officials looked closer, they found 94 of them worked together on the same floor, and 79 of them sat in the same section of the office. Nearly half of the workers on that one floor ended up getting sick. To make sure that doesn't happen again, offices and office buildings will have to take drastic steps from top to bottom. Professor Joseph Allen is an expert in healthy buildings.
We have to employ some of these healthy building strategies like bringing in more fresh outdoor air to dilute the airborne contaminants and filter the recirculated air using high-efficiency filters.
That's just one small part of a multi-layered defense. Desks will have to be spaced at least 2 meters apart. High-walled cubicles may have to make a comeback. Employees and visitors will be subjected to temperature checks. Don't be surprised if everyone has to wear a mask. Kitchens and common areas will likely be off limits. Even the little things like pictures and trinkets on desks will likely disappear to make way for daily deep cleaning.
If you layer enough defenses on top of each other, you make it really difficult, in this case of security, for a bad actor to penetrate your system, right? Same thing with this virus. If you layer enough of these defenses on top of each other, you don't eliminate risk. There's no such thing as zero risk. But you get it to a point where it can become manageable and to a level where people can feel comfortable coming back into your building.
The elevator may be the biggest hurdle. There's just no way around it. Expect a limit on how many people can ride at a time. And then imagine what that means in a building like New York's One World Trade Center, where 8,000 workers are spread across 90 floors. And so the easiest solution may just be for companies to keep some people working from home, staggering shifts or alternating days to have fewer people in the office at any given time.
I think one thing that it has taught people is that you can work remotely and you can do it effectively. Now, the things you can't do effectively, I think that's what we're going to lean on the office for.
Albert De Plazola is the director of global strategy for the design firm Unispace. He sees COVID-19 changing the role of the office forever. Canadian tech giant Shopify has already declared the era of office centricity is over. Employees will stay working from home until 2021. After that, the office will be for specific uses only, not an everyday destination. Twitter has gone even further, telling staff they can work from home forever if they want to.
We've done a ton of surveys with organizations. We're getting a lot of feedback and input from CFOs. And what we're seeing is that at least 40 to 60% of employees want to work from home, even if there is a vaccine, 1 to 3 days a week.
For all the precautions he's taken, Christian Pinkston has found there's not actually much enthusiasm among his staff for returning to the office.
And we did an anonymous survey of our staff a couple of weeks ago, and I was shocked by what I found. They were not ready to come back, and there was still a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. There's very much still avoiding any unnecessary contact with people that aren't, family.
Any plan to get employees back to their desks will have to include plenty of reassurance, a communication plan to let people know what's being done to keep them safe, and flexibility to let them decide when they're ready to come back.
Once we're opening the office to staff, it'll be on a as you're comfortable basis. We'll be sending out alerts when clients or outsiders will be in the office. We're going to be having staff monitoring their temperatures and symptoms and making decisions on a day-by-day basis as to whether it's safe for them to come in.
So lots of communication and some confusion for both employers and employees about when to go back and how to go back. Muneeza Sheikh is a labor and employment lawyer with Levitt LLP, and she's in Richmond Hill, Ontario. Muneeza, thanks for joining us. Returning to work in a pandemic is new ground for all of us. What obligations broadly do employers have when it comes to bringing staff back into the office? Can they just say, we need you back and expect you to show up?
Well, they can certainly say to their employees that we want you back and we need you back, but ultimately whether or not employees have an obligation to show up is largely dependent on how safe the workplace is. Now, I will tell you that employers have to follow much of the very same guidelines that we're watching on TV as they come down the pipeline through the provincial government and direction from the federal government around social distancing where possible, and sometimes with certain jobs, as you know, it isn't possible, and providing appropriate protective gear when social distancing is not possible. So unless employers really understand that they need to step up to the challenge and do their best to keep their employees safe, simply telling them to return to work, given this current pandemic, is not enough.
What about employee rights? Can people be forced back to the office if they feel it's not safe or they're uncomfortable about it?
So while your employer has an obligation to keep you safe and healthy in the workplace, an employer does not have an obligation to accommodate your stress, worry, or angst. Because let's be honest, given the nature of this pandemic and given much of what we've come to learn in the past few weeks and months, there is no guarantee that you will be fully insulated from this virus. So as long as your employer meets that reasonable threshold in terms of keeping you safe, whether it's through social distancing or protective gear, maybe working from remotely in a staggered way. A lot of companies are doing that. I know our firm is doing that. Unless, as long as they are meeting that threshold, simply telling your employer that, look, I understand that you're doing all of these things, but I'm still worried. I still don't want to come into the workplace. That simply is not good enough from the employee perspective. And you could very well be faced with the risk of being told by your employer that because we have done everything that we understand we need to do, your refusal to come into work at this point would either be considered to be a resignation or a job abandonment.
If that reasonable threshold isn't reached, though, if employees find that hygiene isn't sufficient or physical distancing is lax, Are they stuck then, or what can they reasonably do at that point?
They absolutely aren't stuck, although I can appreciate from a positional power perspective that it's really difficult to walk up to your employer and say, hey, you're saying you're doing the right things, but I'm actually here, and it seems like you aren't. In those circumstances, the employees most certainly can file a complaint under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. I know some of the labor relations officers or Ministry of Labor officers are responding pretty promptly to these complaints that can be made anonymously, and they will come and check the workplace out to see if indeed it's only lip service, or has the employer actually implemented the social distancing, the protective gears. And in some cases it might be something as simple as putting up signs and reminders to employees in the lunchroom perhaps, or other areas where employees tend to congregate, reminding them that social distancing is to be observed at all times.
Let's talk about parents working from home who are juggling work duties and looking after young kids. If they don't have access to childcare, school's not back, for example, is that a legitimate reason to say, I can't come back to the office yet?
It absolutely is a legitimate reason. Under the human rights legislation, there is a protected ground which speaks to an accommodation as far as it might relate to family status. And so if you as an employer, and many of my clients have said this to me, have your employees who are parents calling you and saying, look, I understand that you're not offering a remote option, but under no circumstances can I come back into the workplace because I don't have childcare. In those circumstances, what you could expect is a job protective leave that would be unpaid. So your job is safe, but the employer has no obligation to pay you if you are home with your kids.
This is, as I said, new ground for all of us. Do you expect that there'll be lots of test cases of employment law as this pandemic continues?
Absolutely. And what we have been saying to our clients, whether they are employer clients or whether they are employee clients, is this is uncharted territory for so many of us, including employment lawyers. So notwithstanding the fact that, we are giving certain legal advice, we've seen just a couple of weeks ago certain legislative changes. And I think some of these test cases from an employment law perspective in the coming months are really going to map out for us what an accommodation looks like, what the employer's obligations are during a pandemic, and most importantly, what is that reasonable test in terms of keeping employees safe in the workplace. Those are specific areas where I expect there to be a significant amount of legal narrative, which could very well change the advice, some of the advice that we give to our clients.